right now, and this is something that I've started to kind of like champion for my students, or at least to kind of remind them, is to make sure that there's some semblance of fun being had doing and doing the process of writing music or composing, or anything that requires some kind of creative output, or a subjective response. It's to have fun with these sorts of things. I feel like too often these the way we engage with art can be much too daunting and much too critical, which of course is valid and can be valid when it's time to. But when I start to see it's where somebody might be so critical on themselves that it's kind of influencing their output negatively, I have to like ask, like, you having fun doing this? Like what will make you have fun with this kind of process, and frankly, I should say there is, of course, a challenge that has to be overcome with composing. Like composing, it definitely is all about challenges and overcoming them. But I would argue that it should be without the cost of like losing out on the fun aspect of this. You know what I mean? And at least for me, maybe it's because it's just the way I think about things and the kind of optimist that I like to be. But I've started to ask myself more recently, like, am I having fun doing this? And recently, my answer has been yes. Like, I actually have been having pretty much a lot of fun, sort of composing and sort of navigating the challenges and sort of coming up with ideas and letting my things and my various influences inspire me. I'm having fun with the process. I'm having fun with what I hear at the end of it. And I'm having certainly fun with people I meet who also share a similar regard. There's something very just kind of reassuring and important, I think, about just like the positivity and the enthusiasm and the fun aspect of just engaging with music. It's very special that people like ourselves can engage with music as a sort of career choice. You know what I
Right,
mean?
right.
At a professional level and share that with others. I feel very grateful for it. So for me, I like to show my gratitude by making sure that I am enjoying this. So that enjoyment is important for me. Another pillar would be just to ensure that I'm being very patient with myself with the process, but also patient with the musical material as well. And this is something that I feel like I tell my students all the time too. It's like make sure you take enough time with the material. Like don't like just shoot to the next idea so quickly. Because again, for me at least, there's something very special about the creative process when you create this one moment in the music where things are happening, things are unfolding. There's a context for it with things happening before and afterwards. And my thought is, I want to make sure that I give these things enough time that they are allowed to sort of say what they have to say before moving on or before leading us to the next. So that kind of facet of patience certainly evolved from my appreciation and love of Takamitsu's music and his overall aesthetic approaches as well, because I find his music to be remarkably patient in many, many ways. And that's something that I've always, that I adopted very quickly once I really got to sort of deep dive into researching his work. And I've carried it with me to this day. Just this idea of just like, take your time, be patient, there's no rush. So fun and patience, I would say, are our two biggest sort of pillars. And my
Yeah.
third one, of course, would be, as I am a proponent now, is just, of course, embracing identity and letting that, again, influence, inspire, or at least to be aware of it as part of one's own artistic and philosophical background. Everyone's lived experience is very much different, and there's nothing wrong with letting that be a part of the musical output. For me, that makes it even more just like tangible as like a reality. Like this is like you now on the page, or we're hearing you, sonically because you're allowing it to exist as such. Again, and that's a result, of course, of my own journey, my own trajectory, my own grappling of things throughout school and such, and becoming increasingly more aware of myself as somebody of color. But I find that again, for anybody, it's important to allow your identity to at least be present. It doesn't have to be always involved. It doesn't have to be at the foreground of things if you don't want it to be, but at least that there's a presence of this sort of thing, and that could be either cultural identity or as sort of like an interest, like bird song, for example. It could even go just to what you're into, what you like doing. Again, let it be part of the musical experience if you want it to be. Like, there's no rule that says you can't. After all,
I have a couple thoughts based on everything you just said. Patience is something that I recently have been describing as my own pillar. And I did a solo episode to kick off this season. It released as of we're recording this on June 2nd. I released that episode May 13th, May 15th, May 15th. But it's something that, like, over the past few years I've only started realizing. And you're right, like there is so much like satisfaction in actually taking the time to like shape a moment. And you mentioned Takamitsu again. I think his best music, it's like clouds floating in the sky. That's what comes to mind. I think maybe he even,
definitely.
he has all kinds of music about rain coming and stuff like that too. So, but I'm really curious to know more about like this idea of fun and like where that came from. Not because like this isn't fun or can't be fun. Of course it is. But I'm mostly wondering, like, was there ever a moment where you kind of realized maybe you weren't enjoying it and you had to like kind of get back to basics or move back and like rescue yourself, maybe not to be too like dramatic about it?
Yeah, I sort of alluded to it earlier when I had sort of mentioned kind of like the discovery of the question of like what is a composer, like what am I doing as a composer? Because despite me, of course, having the most respect for Belgian, of course, and my time at USF, I never felt like I had a lot of fun doing a lot of things. I mean, I had fun like doing it because it was part of the process, and I was like, yeah, I'm doing it. Like, this is great. But I there's a reason like why I don't speak about any of my work prior to like 2015. Let's say like that's the thing for me. 2015 is like the starting point, which kind of omits like 4.5, 5 years of music prior to that. And so this question of fun for me is something that I was at least not really kind of grappling with initially, at least in 2015 and so on. But it was more about, am I proud of what I'm doing? Is it capturing me as an artist? Is it representing itself in a significant way? And the answer over time has become increasingly yes. But it was never just like strongly yes until again maybe about 2016, 2017, when I started to finally let things like jazz influence my creative output, right? That's when I was like, oh, I'm having a lot of fun with this. I'm having a lot of fun like extracting quotes from Coltrane's Naima and putting it in this sort of
Yeah.
context where I'm loving, looking at the sky and seeing the Ursa Minor constellation and saying like, I want those 7 stars to be in my piece. Like those things for me were fun, and it's become increasingly fun over time since those moments. Because again, it feels like for me, I'm just allowing all of my work to be influenced by something which is just very immediate, very much centered throughout my enjoyment of various things, whatever they are. And it's less about just like, oh, write this piece because like we're telling you to. Again, it's not about there's nothing against the overall process because sometimes it has to be the way when you're learning, frankly. But it's become just easier now, especially as I'm older, to say like I will have fun with this piece writing it instead of like dreading it and being scared about things. It's like no, like let me have fun doing this because frankly it's a lot of investment and a lot of work and a lot of
Yeah.
emotional energy and mental energy to do these things and not have fun with it. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
Like I don't want to do that for the rest of my life. Like not have fun with all this investment. So um, another example recently, actually, as I've started to tap into my Latino background, and I think one of the reasons why I never really grappled with it previously is because for me, my Latino heritage is very much close to my family. I grew up with my mom and my grandma on my mom's side, and they're all Latinos from both New York, and prior to that, Ecuador. So for me, hearing like Latino music, Latino food, speaking Spanish even has always been this very, very personal, very intimate, very familial sort of undertaking. And I felt like music for me was never that kind of environment for it until recently, where I'm like, I want to now let that be part of this. So when I listen to music that is inspired in some sort of fashion in Latino environment, so let's say like Celia Cruz, for example, or any kind of music that has like rhythm and groove, and there's, and they're, of course, they're singing in Spanish, and for me, it feels like it's interesting. It feels so familiar and it feels so normal. And when I hear these things, I'm like brought back to my childhood. And for me, I start to like want to dance. So that to me is again another era of fun. Like I have fun listening to these things, and I want to hear them now in my own music as well. So a lot of my most recent work has started to again to navigate fun in that kind of context. I wrote this piece in October, or that was premiered in October, called Cuervos, which means crows. And it's for bassoon, two percussion, and piano. So it's a
Mm.
quartet and four connected movement. And like the actual sort of, again, it's not meant to be sort of programmatic, but the imagery is just like it's a sort of party, right? A Latino party, and they're all crows, and they're all just getting drunk on tequila, having a good time, and there's a lot of dancing and energy and vibrance. And eventually, at some point, you're of course too drunk to do anything, and you just like relax and take a neat of that. Again, for me, that's very much like my upbringing and context. So. That was the first piece where I was like, man, I had fun doing this. Like, I'm finally like aware of the fact that, oh, fun actually is really an important part of doing this sort of thing because, from the onset, that's like what I wanted the piece to kind of embody because of that one context of it being just kind of like rooted from my Latino experience.
That's the perfect segue to my next question because I was wanting to dig into all of this, and you've mentioned and you're just talking about, you've been reconnecting with your Latino heritage in your music. I have to say I was going through your works list on your website, and like all of the pieces since I think like 2021 are all in like Spanish titles. And the one before that was Black Portrait, which of course also has to do with your identity. And then I was listening to that piece, Cuervos, and I was struck by like, I was impressed, but it was unsurprising because you're a great composer. You were incorporating all these rhythms and kind of this like feeling of Latin American music and all this stuff in a way that wasn't like bashing me over the head with it, and in a way that was just like so beautifully woven together in a way that made sense. So, you've talked about how this shows up in your work with rhythm and energy. Has this shifted the way that you approach your writing at all, like in turning to your heritage? Or even like, I mean, you talked about how like you're having fun composing now. I mean, do any other feelings come up in working with this kind of music?
Yeah, it's interesting how just dramatic this shift happened within the last year, I'd say, with our music in general, because because of the Takamitsu influence and this idea of patience we talked about, my music has become, or my music was very slow, very much patient, intentionally for a very long time. Since like 2017 or so. I mean, all of my works were, with very much glacial tempo markings, like 40, 45. And again, it was meant for me at least to remind myself to like take my time and unfold gestures in this extended horizontal space. I felt like I achieved quite enough of that, at least in a way that then I was thinking like I needed to start like now accessing rhythm and energy. So when I think of rhythm and energy, again, for me, I thought about fun. And when I think about those sorts of things, again, it brings me back to my childhood, being with family, surrounded by family with amazing food and just like loud, vibrant, rhythmic music. And I was like, I want to now navigate rhythm again, or to really focus in on rhythm as being a component of my music, and letting this be kind of the sort of like, again, the mechanism for getting me to sort of to navigate it in a meaningful way. So it's nice to hear you sort of say something about Corvallis, because initially I was very worried about the piece, thinking like, I'm trying to do so many new different things at once,
Yeah.
but at the same time, still trying to incorporate things like patience or my harmonic language, etc., in this sort of context. But for me, I felt like I struck a really nice balance of working both with kind of like rhythmic energy and so sort of like just the kind of fun excitement of this environment, musical environment. I feel like I really achieved a nice balance of that with elements of my sort of like my standard works of things being patient, or my harmonic language being as sort of dense as it is, where it's sort of like self-sufficient and such. Working with things like a bassoon was amazing because I love the bassoon. But yeah, it's in the only piece before that I really was starting to really get into things rhythmically was this work for a sax quartet called Guacamayas, which is Spanish for macaws. I know I mentioned macaws earlier, but that was a piece where I was inspired by just like the visual beauty of macaws, their kind of like personalities, etc. And that was one where it in a way I was actually forced to think more rhythmically and horizontally, because somebody who likes writing 5, 6, 7, 8 note chords could not do that with the sax quartet without relying on something like electronics.
Right. Right.
Um, at first I wanted electronics in that piece because of my reluctance to not have enormous harmony. Before I was like, no, that's a crutch. Let me actually figure this out. So I was like, what, let's think about harmony horizontally instead. So as a result of rhythm emerged from it, and that to me was like, it unlocked the door to say like, actually, I should probably keep trying this out. So that's why Cuervo sort of worked the way it did, because again, from the onset, I was like, I actually will make rhythm and the exploration of rhythm through the lens of fun being kind of like the main proponent of this environment.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Micromaker by Loose Leaf Transmissions. We hope you enjoyed this brief glimpse into the inner workings of the creative life. If this resonated with you, be sure to check out the full conversation on Music Maker with Tyler Kline, a podcast exploring craft and process, philosophy and inspiration, and the honest, often messy parts of being an artist, creative uncertainty, purpose and identity, and resilience. You can find Music Maker wherever you get your podcasts, or by visiting musicmakerpodcast.com.